participants, distinguished speaker, welcome to this webinar organized by our three institutions, CSIS, Rajaratnam School of International Studies in Singapore, or RSIS, as well as National Graduate Institute for Policy Studies, or we know as GRIPS in Tokyo. This is, I think, a continuous cooperation between the three institutions. We organized several webinars already during the pandemics since March. And I think this one also is going to be a very important discussion that we are going to have. As we all know, before I forgot to mention that we acknowledge the presence of Ambassador Kenji Kanasugi, the incoming ambassador of Japan to Indonesia. Thank you for joining us. I believe from Tokyo, Ambassador Ishii's term, I think, will be ended pretty soon. And we are looking forward to meet Ambassador Kanasugi in Jakarta, hopefully physically, not through Zoom by the time you are in Jakarta. And before the pandemic, as we know, we already experienced a kind of uncertain times due to the great power rivalries. A lot has been happening between the US and China, and then the pandemic hit us. The question about the consequences of this great power rivalry continue, and probably is being exacerbated by the pandemic. But with the election of Joe Biden, we are not sure yet, because Trump seems still fighting. But I believe by January 5th next year, the US will have a new president. But whether or not the election of President Biden will reduce the tension or increase the tension remains to be seen. And that's why I think today we are going to have this discussion. We are trying to investigate the impact, the likely impact of the new presidency in the US and the rivalry between US and China in our part of the world, in East Asia in particular. And for that purpose, we are going to have a very experienced and knowledgeable distinguished speaker. We will have Pak Joseph Wanandi, the Vice Chairman, Board of Trustee of CSIS Foundation. And then, of course, Professor Akihiko Tanaka, President of GRIPS in Tokyo. His Excellency Ambassador Ong Keng Yong, the Executive Deputy Chairman of RSIS. And I haven't seen Professor Dewi Fortuna Anwar of the Indonesian Institute of Sciences. She'll be joining hopefully pretty soon. We are going to have 10 minutes max for each speaker, so we can have enough time for discussion. Because I see on the screen we have some expert as well. Our very own Ambassador Rizal Sukma is on the screen. He's back in Jakarta, done with his confinement in London. Now he's in different confinement in Jakarta. But I believe Bang Rizal will have a lot to say about this topic. And I see as well Professor Mioba from Kanagawa University in Japan, and Dr. Adrian Ng, Joel Ng, and Sean Ho, and others. Ambassador Imura, I believe they are going to have something to say as well on the topic after the speakers. Now, before I'd like to invite Pak Joseph Wanandi first to speak about 10 minutes. Screen is yours, Pak Yusuf.
Thank you. Thank you, Philip. Well, let me start to say that I don't have, of course, the magic lamp, to show what is going to happen in the near future in relation to the United States after the elections, after so many upheavals has happened and still are happening in the United States. But let me try. The United States presidential election is not just about the United States. The whole world is waiting to see how US foreign policy may change in the coming months. For us in East Asia, we anxiously wait for the impact of Biden winning the elections on the global dynamics and the US-China relations in particular. Well, you know, two big powers cannot live with each other, and that is the Thucydides trap. In the present era, these powers are the United States and China. China-US relations is currently the most important, as global order could only be established through orderly and productive relationships between the two. Neither country could be able to realize its true full potential if opposition by the other impedes progress. At present, the dynamics are unfortunately counterproductive. All the pillars supporting sound China-US relations, security, economic development, and culture are being wrecked by both sides. It is mounting security concerns on every other dimension of the US-China relationship. Economic and cultural gains cannot fully compensate for perceived security losses. A recent public opinion survey indicates that citizens in the US and China increasingly view each other as a threat. The American public's unfavorable ratings of the PRC in 2019 exceeded even the very high unfavorable ratings in 1989, the year of the Tiananmen Square violence. Moreover, there is now an unmistakable trend in both the US and China towards assuming that civil society and educational organizations working on one another's soils are instruments of subversion rather than mutual understanding and shared benefit. For the US, for almost 2 decades, has undermined its own greatest soft power, which includes orderly governance at home and generally responsible behavior abroad. A series of issues have undermined their credibility. Iraq war, domestic economic mismanagement, global financial crisis, and withdrawal from agreements that Washington has encouraged and signed. America First, as promoted by Trump, is a doctrine with no attraction to anyone but a fraction of the American public. The economic interdependence between the US and China has been hurt by Trump. On China's side, Chairman Deng's advice, do not show off, and that China should accept that in many cases, China is still behind. If you remain pragmatic, you know when to stop and when to push ahead. Looking at China's policies of late, which some have been assertive towards the neighboring countries, it seems that Deng's advice needs to be revived. At this stage, China has to improve her policies of opening the economy for trade, which she has promised the world. China has also promised to respect intellectual property rights. How China is going to organize her economic development is her own problem, including how she will plan and organize her objectives with her technology development and when to achieve it. There are limits what the world could ask from China. The US strategy in Asia has been to prevent one single big power or a coalition from controlling the Eurasian landmass and the Pacific. The United States speaks increasingly of the need to cooperate with like-minded countries, but it seems that this does not include China. China sees hegemony and containment as the ultimate aim of US policies. At present, the US is facing China and Russia that are conducting joint military exercises as a deterrence against the United States. The alignment of Beijing and Moscow is growing closer as Washington seeks to construct a counter-alignment with its Indo-Pacific strategy, thereby moving the relationship from the realm of mutual strategic suspicion towards strategic friction and mutual deterrence. Thus, the signals of the declining cooperation between the United States and China are everywhere. The current trade frictions between China and the US are inflicting pain on the global economy as well as on the citizens of both countries. Taiwan and Hong Kong are, of course, big issues in their relations. The unanimous passage of the Taiwan Travel Act 2018 was signed by President Trump without making any statement expressing the intention to implement the act, consisting with the 3 communiques and the Taiwan Relations Act, which has been the documents that provide the framework for China-US relations for 40 years. I argue that East Asia is lucky that Biden has won the election. If Trump is re-elected, it could be a calamity for the US and the world. The US could never recover from her former leadership of the world. In that case, a new rational president, quote unquote, such as Biden, would be rational and more sensible to China. But either way, the US policy towards China remains strict. The US will continue to think that China is not always honest in implementing her obligations and promises. With Biden as the new president, the US and China could have some mutual basic understanding and lay down some basic agreements on how 2 big powers should go about running the international order, then peace, stability, and development in the world could be maintained. The world cannot accept a hegemon anymore in the future. International relations should be multilateral. China and the US could be the primus inter pares. Now, the US and China must decide whether they will pursue primacy and dominance or seek regional balance by making room for one another. The latter approach seems feasible and advisable, and the former does not. Both sides have to answer the questions each other put to the other. Will the United States make room for China internationally? And will China allow for the United States influence in the region, especially in the Asia Pacific? What can we expect now that Biden has won the election? First, maybe we have to be reminded that Trump has not been willing to accept defeat and transfer authority to Biden. This means, another 2 months, possibly, until the 20th of January. This means that he can still create obstacles for Biden, especially if he himself or a member of his family plans to run in the 2024 election. Some members of the GOP or the Republican Party will continue their support to Trump. Biden will come across difficulties in changing some of Trump's earlier policies, most of which, in fact, did not make sense. But he still has 73 million plus votes supporting him, which is a healthy number of support from the public. Second, Biden will be most probably face a Senate that will be dominated by the Republicans, should they win the special elections for the 2 seats in Georgia State, which will then give seats to 52 Republicans and 48 Democrats in the Senate. President Obama has 6 years of resistance from the Senate, since it was won by the Republicans in 2010 and damaged a lot of his programs. Third, President Biden will face also pressures from the left wing of his party and made it more difficult for him to change Trump's earlier policies. Fourth, Trump's policies have damaged the image of the United States, particularly due to his arrogant and contemptuous ways of delivering his messages, including to United States alliances and friends. I think such damage will not be easily reversed. Many countries now feel that they can no longer depend on the United States and its policies. Fifth, although Biden's demeanor and style will be more amenable, but when it comes to US-China relations, a strong opinion has been formed within the United States. Negative public opinion in the US towards China can be expected to try to have a more regular and normal relationship. Will make it difficult to improve bilateral relations. No longer the motto America first, Biden can be expected to try a more regular and normal relationship with East Asia. Nonetheless, he is going to have difficulties to restoring normal relationship with China as a partner. I believe that Biden would make serious efforts to maintain a positive relation with China to a certain extent. In fact, both US and China would want to see a better relationship between the two great powers. But so many things has happened in the meantime. When Obama was president, the Chinese made the effort to obtain this, but it never got traction. Now it will be more important because of the balance of power is even closer than 5 years ago. So what can we expect now in East Asia? And how can the region contribute to a positive great power relations? For East Asia, regionalism is still relevant and continues to be the practice. We witnessed the recent signing of RCEP. This could be East Asia's way to deal with the US and China. ASEAN and its regional frameworks could contribute in creating the atmosphere for future meetings and possibly agreements for a new relation. The ASEAN Plus 3, China, Japan, and ROK, and the East Asia Summit are important avenues in the future. Yet, ASEAN and the ASEAN Plus 3 have to work very hard to get their ideas accepted by US and China through the East Asian Summit. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you, Pak Yusuf Wanandi. And there are mixed pictures that you present to the forum that for the future regarding the US-China competition and how it will impact our region in East Asia. But I think we note that your point about multilateralism is the norm that is more preferable with China-US relation at the core, and then also some pessimism I think is in the order that is, while Biden might be more sensible compared to Trump earlier, but domestic challenges and political reality in the US might prevent him from pursuing a more normal relations with East Asia. And then there are points that you make about the possible contribution by East Asia region, the signing of RCEP, and then ASEAN, of course, will be two things or two factors that East Asia can contribute to mitigate the impact of the consequences of the US-China competition in East Asia. Now, I'd like to invite Professor Akihiko Tanaka to present your views about 10 minutes. The screen is yours, Professor.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the National Graduate Institute for Policy Studies, I would like to thank Yusuf and Ong Ken-yon and CSIS staff and RSIS staff for making this webinar possible. To address the challenging topic of today, I would like to first examine what seems to be constant in international relations and what can change. The former, what will be constant, we may be able to call it the structure of international relations. The latter, what can change, include many things. Who occupies the presidency of the United States can change. And in fact, as was mentioned, we are expecting a new president will be sworn in on January 20th. So what are the things that are not expected to change in the foreseeable future? First, I think that China continues to grow its economic, technological, and military power. Does not change. China will not suddenly become weak. Second, the second thing that doesn't change. the authoritarian nature of China's political system under the Chinese Communist Party is not likely to change. The first tendency, China's continuing growth alone can bring about a danger of Thucydides' trap, as Yusuf mentioned. But combined with the second constant, authoritarian and repressive nature of China's political system will produce fear, at least among people in the liberal democracies, of losing their liberty as well as their security. If China dominates the world economically, technologically, and militarily, they fear China might impose its authoritarian rule upon all peoples in the world. Even if China might refrain from overt military action, virtually all countries, businesses, and media can be pressured to refrain from saying or doing anything that the Chinese Communist Party does not tolerate. What is unfolding in China-Australia relations now is a clear indication of this possibility. And because of this reasoning, I think, what will not change very easily is the determination of American people not to allow this to happen. On this issue, we see clear bipartisan consensus, especially in Congress. The birth of the Biden administration is not likely to change this determination of Americans. Increasingly, this fear is spreading to other liberal democracies, including Japan and Western Europe, and certainly Australia. So these constants continue to strain the US-China relations in the foreseeable future. The most important area of competition, in my understanding, well, if not outright confrontation between the two superpowers, I think will be the area of technological competition. China's technological legitimacy could make the fear of the threat to liberty reality to Americans as well as people in other liberal democracies. So I think the United States will try all sorts of efforts to prevent China from gaining technological hegemony. For that purpose, the United States, I think, is likely to create and expand what I might call the circle of like-minded countries to restrict undesirable transfers of critical technology to China. Also, in order to pressure China on this front, I think the Biden administration may not abrogate all the tariffs that the Trump administration imposed soon, at least. And it's a bit strange to say because Mr. Biden criticized Trump's trade war. But in my understanding, Mr. Biden is likely to demand China to fulfill the first stage agreement that the Trump administration concluded with China last January, as it was not an agreement between China and Trump, but an agreement between the two sovereign states. I think this agreement could be useful for the Biden administration to have better negotiations with China. But of course, with the coming of the Biden presidency, many things can and will change. He already announced that the United States will come back to the Paris Agreement of climate change, and that the United States will not withdraw from the World Health Organization, contrary to President Trump's declarations last spring. Mr. Biden also stressed the importance of the alliance. The NATO allies welcomed this. In the telephone conversation with Prime Minister Suga, Mr. Biden reiterated the commitment of the United States to the defense of Japan, including the Senkaku Islands. So we would be able to expect a significant reduction of tension among the US allies. such institutions like G7 could once again become a forum to work out a unified policy stance of their approach to many issues around the world. Mr. Biden and his foreign policy team also would participate in ASEAN-centered international frameworks more actively than the Trump administration. American diplomacy will become more predictable. As his announcement of the return to the Paris Accord and his appointment of John Kerry as a US envoy on climate change indicate, climate change can be a major focus of his foreign policy. This is a welcome change to the international community because unless the United States and China make serious efforts to reduce their greenhouse gas emission, the efforts of all other countries will become useless. Xi Jinping already declared that China tries to achieve net zero emission by 2060. So if the US becomes ready to make bold efforts to cutting back on greenhouse gas emission, COP26, which is postponed because of the COVID-19 to the next autumn, can become a significant international gathering to accelerate joint international efforts. Well, in my opinion, if only not to give excuse to China from retracting from the carbon neutral commitment, it is quite important that the United States becomes serious about climate change. Next year, we hope that the world could enter a transitional period from the pandemic to the post-pandemic world. During this period, one of the most important issues could be the distribution of effective and safe vaccines. It seems only natural that the countries where effective and safe vaccines are first developed tend to distribute them to their citizens. But eventually, vaccines should be available to people all over the world. A new international framework called COVAX Facility, a joint mechanism to buy and distribute vaccines throughout the world, established by the initiatives of Gavi and CEPI and WHO, is expected to play an important role in this transitional period. Many countries, including Japan and China, have already committed their cooperation. The United States, unfortunately, has not joined this yet. With the coming of the Biden administration, I think Japan and other countries should persuade the US to join the COVAX facility. So if these areas of cooperation on global issues spread, the atmosphere of international cooperation improves. But we do not know if China refrains from assertive actions in South China Sea and the East China Sea. We do not know if China refrains from imposing more repressive measures in Hong Kong. Well, recent arrests of liberal activists suggest a contrary direction. Further, we do not know if China refrains from such bullying as it does to Australia. If China's behavior becomes less assertive and less self-centered, the atmosphere improves and the process of international relations would become more cooperative, even though the structure remains competitive. If not, the atmosphere remains only an atmosphere. With this, I would end my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Tanaka. And I think the framework that you provide about the continuity and change or the constant and change are well taken because you know there are areas for possible cooperation between US and China, especially in the climate, hopefully, and with the new commitment by Joe Biden to come back to the Paris Agreement might give us some hopes, because as you noted that without US participation and China's participation, the other efforts by other countries to reduce the carbon emission will not be very effective. And the area of technology for sure is one contentious area that will be very important for other countries as well. Now I'd like to invite Ambassador Ong Keng Yong to give your views on the topic for 10 minutes. Ambassador, the screen is yours.
Thank you to CSIS for hosting this. Yeah, I follow behind my guru, Yuso Wanandi and Tanaka-san. They have covered much of the things that we are interested in. Maybe I will just quickly sum up. I share their various points, but since I'm the third speaker, I think I can just sum up and say that it is going to be a challenging time, even though it is a different president in the United States of America. Yeah, maybe Mr. Biden is less egoistic than Mr. Trump. But looking at the situation in the US, we are confronted with three basic issues. Yeah, the American president will be focused on domestic division in his country. Yeah, we have read so many things about left and right. What about the center? Even now, center people of different persuasion have different opinion about what is the center in American politics. So first D will be domestic division. The second D will be what I call the American debt. The debt situation in America is very bad. Various studies are now focused on how can the US economy, how can the US society sustain that high level of debt. The United States government owes a lot of money to many different institutions and other things. But up to now, most ASEAN countries feel that as long as the US dollar is still the world standard or reserve currency, yeah, they can continue to print the US dollars and go further into that. But it is an issue, and with Ms. Janet Yellen hoping to become the first lady Secretary of Treasury in the US, this issue of the debt will be very much in focus. That means that Biden's attention will be further distracted. And the third D that I have is actually what I call digitalization. Perhaps this is one new area that my two seniors have not covered in their respective presentation. But over here in RSIS Singapore, we feel very strongly that the American society outside New York, outside the stock market, outside the key research location like the Silicon Valley, they are not digitalized. They are very much still in the early 20th century economic model. And the connectivity is poor with the rest of the world in terms of what has happened with multilateral trade, with economic systems and so on. Yeah. Actually, I look forward to more of Rizal Sukma's writing and articulation in the coming months, since he has returned now to Jakarta. He is the expert on these kind of issues. But what I want to highlight today is that digitalization is critical. This particular US presidential election has shown how much more people can influence electoral outcome and opinion of the general population with regard to political ideas and so on through the use of the social media. But the reason why social media makes such a headway in America is because the large segment of the American population is not digitalized and they are not IT savvy. So here, we in Southeast Asia, in ASEAN, can say to have an advantage because our young population in ASEAN, more than 60% of our ASEAN population is under the age of 35. And almost all of these 35 year-old ASEAN citizens are actually IT savvy. So we are having some good advantage as the world economy become more and more digitalized. But the point I want to make is that if the Biden administration is focused on domestic divisions, focused on the debt that the American economy carrying today, and if they want to deal with digitalization to increase their competitiveness and their connectivity, there is little time left for the Biden administration to look beyond the borders of the United States of America. Whatever time they have, they look at Europe, they look at Russia, they look at China, they look at Japan, and maybe a bit of India. Yeah. So what do we do in ASEAN? I have mentioned to my colleagues here in the research programs in RSIS that ASEAN must continue to demonstrate the value of its value-added character. All these years, as Pak Yusof have witnessed and worked with in various track 2 pathways, ASEAN can only value add to what is out there so that people will give us attention, give us the policy parameter to operate. And also for all the ASEAN member states, respective ASEAN member states, if we can do this value adding, we can play a role. Small country like Singapore, Brunei, yeah, Laos, Cambodia, we can have our voices heard, and maybe we can do a bit more because we are always focused on value adding. So ASEAN value adding, we were right on the existing mechanism. But Yusof have talked about the East Asia Summit. Yeah, I think that is something we should now do more, use more to engage the Biden administration and even all the other big countries around the world. And we have heard about the arrival of RCEP, yeah, and we also have the CPTPP, yeah. So these are things which the Biden people will have to look at because they need to go back into the multilateral trading system. There is no other pathway for them to maintain US dominance or supremacy in the global system except through economic and trade mechanism, yeah, because that generate money, that generate a certain influence. Yeah, all of us are dependent on trade. If the American decided to use maximum pressure on whatever they don't like, then we are having to bend a bit here and bend a bit there to continue the relationship going forward. So I thought that this is a time for ASEAN to go back to our original mission. Our original mission focused around growing our own respective economy, our own society. Yeah, don't allow Southeast Asia to be used by other people for their respective competition and rivalries. Yeah, how we do it, because we don't know what we call the kinetic power. We don't have military strength, and even in the early years and now, our soft power is still relatively minor compared to others. So we focus on getting people together, convene meetings, and value adding. So EAS, ADMM+, yeah, even ARF, Papa Yusof, can be refreshed and do more. Yeah, Biden and his people will be focused on Hong Kong, Taiwan, yeah, South China Sea, and now maybe Mekong. Yeah, all this means that they will look at ASEAN and our development and needs in Southeast Asia as a secondary agenda. But never mind, secondary also means that they will still be present and be available to help us as long as everyone maintain peace and security. It should be something that we can be grateful for. But more importantly, I think Biden and his team will have to look at Southeast Asia and ASEAN because there is so much US business interest in our region. And if you believe in all the studies that have been put out, American consultants have been very good at this. The one consistent thing that come across in all the studies, whether it is democratically funded or republicanly funded, or from New York or Los Angeles or in Houston or in other parts of America, they show that the growth potential of Southeast Asia is tremendous, not only now, but for the next 20 to 30 years. Because one, our population is young and digitalized, more educated than many other regions, collectively speaking. Number two, we happen to be in a very good geographical position. People wanting to go into China, wanting to go into India, they come here first. If they make it here, they can go further into all these big economies. And more importantly, Japan, Korea, the two economic dynamo in our region, are focused on doing more in Southeast Asia. And lastly, China itself is not giving this space in Southeast Asia to other people. So therefore, if ASEAN, we know how to operate and get people to use our natural assets or our clever management of issues and value-adding capability, we will be able to stay in business and do more. Thank you. Philip, I stop here.
Thank you, Ambassador. There are a lot to be discussed from your presentation. For sure, questions and opinions will come up later. And now I'd like to invite Professor Dewi Fortuna Anwar for 10 minutes to give your thoughts on the topic. The screen is yours, Ibu Dewi.
Thank you very much, Philip. Thank you very much to CSIS for inviting me in this very distinguished panel. And thank you. I've enjoyed the earlier remarks by Pak Yusuf, Tanaka-san, Pak Ong. So I'm lucky to be the last, but it also means that I don't really have much left to say. I will focus my remarks really on the impacts of the Biden's elections to Southeast Asia. Ambassador Ong has already mentioned about ASEAN. I think the general mood in Southeast Asia, the general perception towards the defeat of Trump and the election of Biden has been relief. There's been a positive attitude because the recent expectation that the US foreign policy will become normalized again, that it will become much more reliable and much more predictable. We might not necessarily like all the policy, but at least they'll be based on more regular consultations and that it will be less arbitrary. And there's also, secondly, that given that Biden was the presidency of President Obama, and that Obama really reoriented US foreign policy to Asia with its Asia pivot or rebalancing to Asia, there's an expectation that a similar focus on East Asia will be resurrected. That there will be not necessarily Obama 2.0, but that the US emphasis on Southeast Asia and Asia will also be a mark of this foreign policy. And I'm looking at what the expectations of US foreign policy would be. I relook again at Biden's foreign affairs article in 2016 when the Obama administration just left office, and there was an article of September-October 2016 titled "Building on Success and Opportunities for the Next Administration." And here, Biden re-emphasized that the American foreign policy and American status in the world was at highest point during that time because the US had succeeded in strengthening its relations with its traditional allies in Asia, Australia, Japan, the Philippines, and South Korea, as well as expanding partnership. And here, we always, there's always frustrations that in Washington, political leaders are not that knowledgeable about Southeast Asia. Southeast Asia is sometimes only seen as a derivative of its China policy, and not many people know about ASEAN. But Biden knows about ASEAN, because in that article, he spectacularly pointed out that ASEAN, the United States needs to work with ASEAN to advance a rules-based order. So I think that that is a very good start for the region. And also his focus on managing relations with regional power, the focus on US-China relations. Also, this is very, very important, that recognizing that US and China as the strongest economies, the fates of these two countries are inextricably linked, so that they cannot really be separated. And here it says that, it's not, the question is not about competition or cooperation, but that competition and cooperation will have to coexist with each other. That the United States needs to be tough on issues that they need to stand up to. For example, China's abusive policies and human rights violations, but on areas of convergence, global transnational challenges like climate change, like nuclear proliferation, and global pandemic, for example, the US and China need to work together within multilateral contexts. And this, he has reiterated, of course, in his recent Foreign Affairs article of March, April 2020, of why America needs to lead again. Very scathing criticisms of Trump's foreign policy, which has alienated both allies and partners, and led to a very diminished American standing in the world. And in Southeast Asia, this perceptions of the diminishing of American standing was born very clear in a survey carried out by ISIS late last year, and it published early this year in a State of Southeast Asian publication. It clearly shows that the US has really lost its position within the region. When Southeast Asian countries are asked about which country is most influential, both politically and economically, China, by overwhelming majority, by over 70% of people in the region, right, regard that China is the most important political, the most influential politically and economically, at over 70%, while the United States lags far behind at only about 7%. And when questions about reliability as a strategic partner, as a security partner, the US has really gone down, because during the Trump administration, attention to ASEAN has really diminished. Trump only attended one East Asia summit, and did not in fact fill the post of the US ambassador to ASEAN in Jakarta throughout that administration. So that Biden is right that United States needs to work hard, and he correctly pointed out that in his article that leadership does not come by magic, that it has to be earned, and that United States need to be much more consistent and work hard here. So there is great expectations in the region that the US will again pay attention to multilateral cooperation and will support ASEAN centrality. But looking at particularly on issues that are of concern to countries in Southeast Asia, the Foreign Policy Committee of Indonesia carried out a survey about the top priorities for the region, and the top priorities are first, economic recovery, which has been devastated by COVID, then the COVID-19 pandemic itself, and then unresolved territorial disputes, particularly the South China Sea, and US-China rivalry. So while for most of us, US-China rivalry comes at the top, for people in the region, it's economic issues that matters the most. Now, on the US-China rivalry, countries in Southeast Asia have been very concerned at the escalation of tension between US and China under Trump, particularly with, it seems to be at all levels, the trade war, the conflict over technology, even conflict over COVID-19. So multiple areas of conflict. So there is an expectation that under Biden, with his more nuanced approach to China, where in the US will need to be tough on China on certain issues, but that it is willing to cooperate on China on other issues, that this fear that Southeast Asia will be increasingly divided or be forced to take sides hopefully it will be lessened, because that is the fear of Southeast Asia, that our region will again be used as a theater of conflict that at the regional and also at the national or even subnational levels, that we would be vulnerable to proxy wars as these two superpowers compete for influence. So if there are areas of cooperation, that will also include other ASEAN countries, and in areas where US needs to be tough, particularly in the South China Sea, that is also of great interest to Southeast Asia, that will be welcomed by Southeast Asia. On the economy, Biden mentioned about, the US will oppose protectionism now, and this will be of great, interest to the region as well, because the trade war between the US and China has really hurt Southeast Asia. When in the survey carried out by ICIS, all countries in the region said that that the trade war between the US and China have really harmed the economy, and in fact, Indonesia ranked highest of the concerns, because the trade war has really harmed Indonesia's economy, because Indonesia is much less competitive in comparison to many other ASEAN partners. So if the US and China trade war is eased, it's no longer as intensified, and we need, that protectionism, America first policy is reduced, there is an expectation that it will also help us to in our economic recovery. Also on COVID-19, under Trump, this is also an area of contestation. So under Biden, he has emphasized the willingness of the United States to work with multilateral institutions with other countries on COVID-19. So that would be of course very welcome for us. Now this, and he emphasized about reintroducing democracy onto the global agenda, revitalizing democracy in America, and also bringing back democracy to the global agenda. And how will this be perceived within the ASEAN region? I would argue that this is a very important policy. There's a general consensus that a democratic president tends to be much more value-oriented in its foreign policy than a Republican, which is more pragmatic. So under a democratic administration, attention to values like democracy, human rights, and good governance and environments will be intensified. And countries in South Asia tend to be a bit mixed about this. There are concerns about interference in the internal affairs of the member states of ASEAN, for example, greater US scrutiny on democracy and human rights practices will make a lot of leaders, regimes in Southeast Asia uncomfortable. But at the same time, given the real decline in democracy and human rights globally and within ASEAN, there's been a general decline, and there have not been much talks about democracy and human rights after the signing and the adoption of the ASEAN Charter. We seem to have abandoned this, and like in Indonesia, the focus on economic development and infrastructure building, the interest on attracting FDI, particularly from China, has also led to concomitant decline in commitments to democracy and human rights, and also this growing concerns that the China model of economic governance could be seen as a winning model, and while this might not be of issues to some, for a lot of us in Southeast Asia, particularly amongst the civil society, this is a great concern, and this is reflected in the huge demonstrations in Thailand, also demonstrations in Indonesia end of 2019, and also recently 2000 about this democratic deficits and the state capture by vested interests, for example. So there will be a bit mixed reception to this greater emphasis on democracy, but I think that it will be good also to focus ASEAN again on this issue. The question is whether China will see Biden's more nuanced approach in managing relations with China, that coexistence between cooperation and competition as a weakness, or whether it will be seen as as something that it will also embrace. If it sees that as its weakness. It will weaken Biden, of course, and then embolden the critics in America, say that, Trump got it right. But if Beijing sees this as an opportunity, then we see that maybe, hopefully, the escalation of tension between the two great powers will diminish, and that will give more space to the region, to ASEAN, to carry out its agency in conducting the management of great powers through ASEAN regional mechanism, including the ASEAN Outlook on Indo-Pacific. The mentions about Southeast Asia.
Excuse me, could you wrap up?
I wrap up that, this concern that Southeast Asia is not of primary importance to the US. On the one hand, this is good because less heat to Southeast Asia, but we do not really appreciate on the whole to be seen simply as an appendix to China policy. Given the attributes of Southeast Asia, its strategic locations, its size of population and economic potential, I think it is important that the Southeast Asia should be seen by all other countries, including United States, on its own merit. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ibu Dewi. And I think we have 4 great presentations. And if I may, there are common themes of the 4 speakers. Number one, there are common concerns about the domestic situation within the US, especially in the US. The strong partisanships within the US population might prevent Biden to pursue a more normal international relations, as well as partisanship in the Congress and Senate. Domestic debts, as Ambassador Keng Yong mentioned, a lack of digitalization on the part of the US society that disconnect, quote unquote, them from what has been going on in the other part of the world, trade, international trades, and so on. A second area, or a second common theme is there are area of convergence between the two, between the US and China. Climate change might be one, vaccines cooperation and global health cooperation and pandemics, how we mitigate the impact of the pandemic. These are seen as a common convergence, area of convergence between the two. And number 3, I think the common theme is the expectation of ASEAN to play a role to turn competition of the two into cooperation by refreshing the existing ASEAN mechanisms, various ASEAN mechanisms, IRF, East Asia Summit, RCEP, and so on and so forth. And then in a way, ASEAN needs to go back, according to Ambassador Keng Yong, to its value added as a convening power that could engage US and China in East Asia. Now, I'd like to we have 30 minutes for Q&A. And there's already one question from the floor before I ask maybe some of the distinguished participant on the screen to give some thought. But there's one question from the audience first. Maybe this is for either of the 4 speakers. What would be the future of the Quad under Joe Biden administration? Will it be escalated into something than just security partnership? I suspect Tanaka-san would have some opinion on this. Please, Tanaka-san.
Well, thank you. I think the evolution of Quad has been one of the interesting trends in this region, particularly Indo-Pacific implications. I believe under the Biden administration, the evolution continues. The incentive on the part of Japan, Australia, India to have better relations with the Biden administration is very, very strong. And and then also, I think among some of the phraseology that the Biden camp has been using include such things like the League of Liberal Democracies. And so when it comes to American rethinking about the Indo-Pacific, I think US could consider Japan, Australia, India, natural partners. And so I think the Quad will evolve to become stronger. Well, incidentally, GRIPS, under the initiative of Ambassador Imura and Mr. Shinoda, made a recommendation to the Japanese government, which includes a recommendation to upgrade the Quad. We don't use the word Quad. We say Japan, US, Australia, India, regular foreign minister meeting, upgraded into the summit level meeting. And so I think whether you would call it Quad or not, relations amongst the four countries, I think, will improve.
Thank you, Tanaka-san. If I may request Ambassador Rizal Sukma to give us some insight, because we know you are a long-time observer of China and Indonesia-China relation and China in general. Maybe 2 or 3 minutes, Bang Rizal, screen is yours.
Thank you, Phillips. Hi, everyone. It's great to be back. It's great to see you, Pa Ong. On the screen, you are the only one with the title of His Excellency. and also, it's good to see Imura-san and Professor Tanaka. Well, after 4.5 years in London, I become less optimistic than before when it comes to the United States. I don't think that it's easy to trust a country that can elect Trump as a president. And I think the worst is yet to come. Probably in 2024, they still can elect someone worse than Trump. So, you know, the key word that Ibu Dewi mentioned, the consistency, I think it's really, really difficult, you know, to predict from now on. So the US has become unreliable. You know, if we use Donald Trump's word, you know, they are risking, you know, to become a shithole. So that's, you know, I think the things that we really need to, you know, think about, you know, to what extent that we want to put, you know, our trust, you know, in a country that need to restore its credibility as a superpower, needs to, you know, restore its credentials as democracy, and also need to regain trust, you know, from partners and allies. So it's not easy, I think, you know, because, you know, like Pa Yusuf mentioned, more than 71 million people actually still, you know, elect, you know, Trump, choose Trump as president. So the future of the US, I think, you know, still on this very shaky foundation. Not to mention that I think Japan and Singapore and all of us need to educate the US now that Asia is not China, India, and the rest. So if you read the news of the Financial Times, you know, they're planning to have these 3 departments within the National Security Council, which deal with first China, second India, and then third the rest. The rest means Japan, South Korea, and all Asian allies of America. Then, you know, I think we still need, you know, to educate the US about Asia. Second point on China, I completely agree with Pa Yusuf that, you know, we all need also to educate China, you know, to revisit Deng Xiaoping's principles, you know, in diplomacy and in foreign policy, because, you know, we don't need these warriors, you know, diplomacy that they've been, you know, doing over the last 3-4 years. They, you know, will create more unnecessary enemies also. So I think when it comes to China, so Indonesia, I think is much better position, you know, to tell them. So we need, you know, some kind of division of labor here. Singapore and Japan can tell the US and how to, you know, actually change and then conduct its, you know, Asia policy, and Indonesia can tell the Chinese, you know, how to behave in the region. So thank you, Philip. So that's my short, you know, comments.
Thank you, Bang Rizal. While we are at it about this democracy, the credential of the US as the democracy, questions from the floor through the Q&A box on Zoom. There are 3 or 4 asking about this democracy promotion, and as if, you know, it should be pit between democracy and non-democracy. That is US against China. And then also, as Professor Tanaka mentioned in his remark, that one thing that would not change is that the authoritarian nature of the Chinese political system, and that will embolden always the US policymakers and probably US society to deal with China head on. Now, if I may have a question to all panelists, will it be possible to have a cooperation between these two superpowers that has completely different word value and a very different political system? Because from the questions, it seems that we have to choose between the two. And for probably many countries, especially developing countries, it's not really a matter of democracy or non-democracy, but whether or not we can develop. So to all panelists, could you address this question about, can we have a cooperation between? Is it possible to have US and China cooperate regardless of their, different worldview about democracy and so on? If I may, Pak Yusuf first. 2 minutes.
Well, of course, you know that every time and again, two powers as big as both they are, so it always means a problem, and it does always not has to be a confrontation. In many cases, it has been a confrontation, but in other cases, 6 or 7 in history, has been a peaceful transfer, like in the last one between Great Britain and the United States. So it is not impossible that we have to create that, because otherwise there is no other way. The world is at its end, With the pandemic, you can see you don't want to cooperate, you are going down the drain of everybody. So as simple as that. The challenge that has been put by COVID, according to me, has shown that we in the future can no more, stay behind alone, not the United States, neither China. So therefore, that is our chance as we can get our act together in a community. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Yusuf. Now I'd like to invite Ambassador Ong Keng Yong to give kind of your view about the questions.
Well, I think there is no other choice, Philip. If you look at the two big powers, if they don't cooperate and basically stand on different end of the spectrum, then they are just going to be the two big powers by themselves. Yeah. And the fact of the matter is that the rest of the world today have 190 other countries, some small one, some medium power, a middle power, and some as big as the US and China. In fact, Russia is as big as US and China combined in terms of territory. So if they insist on this old ideological divide, then I don't think there is any hope for themselves. So in the end, it is mutual dependency and finding a way to, sure, you can maintain your democracy and your communism, but in between, there is a lot of space for both sides to do more together. And today, we have two very important world or global issues, which actually have no other previous structure or order or what have you, except our respective bias and egos. Number one, climate change. And number two, the digitalization that I mentioned about. If we go on like that with digitalization and artificial intelligence, very soon, all of us don't have to speak here in this kind of lectern. We will just go and press a button and some robot will speak like Yusof Wanandi or, Rizal Sukma. Then what happened to human? So if people are serious about democracy and communism, they go back to one fundamental point, which is human and humanities. And I think there are sensible people on both sides to be able to counsel for some middle point where everybody can converge. The one thing that I want to add is that the 4 years of Donald Trump show one thing. This label called authoritarianism ought to be changed. Americans were subjected to 4 years of Trump authoritarianism. Yeah, so maybe we should be a bit more differentiated, more sensitive, instead of just throwing all these slogans and labels around. Every country has a certain kind of authority. In Japan, yeah, in Thailand, in the UK, they respect the monarchy, and there is a kind of absolute quality about having a monarchy. Is that something undemocratic? Yeah. So I feel that there is enough room for both powers, US and China, to work together on how do we look at managing the climate change? How do we handle the complete taking over of our life and the way we know the world as it is by the machines and the automation and the digitalization? Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Ong Keng Yong. Ibu Dewi, 2 minutes, please.
Yeah, okay. Foreign relations, conducting foreign policy, there's always this divide about interests on the one hand and values on the other. When do interests prevail or when do values prevail? Values are, of course, important in conducting foreign policy, but most time, countries' foreign policy are based on interests, and their interests, they are between the United States and China. There are, of course, divergent interests, but there are also a lot of converging interests, and I think Biden has mentioned that. And in terms of the promotion of democracy and the US taking the lead again on democracy, I think it is recognized, as Rizal and Yusuf mentioned, about the US itself needs to get its house in order. I think this is recognized very much by Biden and the coming administration, that you cannot simply tell the world to follow you if the US itself is democracy is not in a very good health. So I think it recognizes that people will only listen to the US talking about democracy when it gets its own house in order in terms of better protection for minorities and better integrity of its democratic system, which, by the way, Trump's denial of Biden's win has actually undermined the democratic process in the United States. Will countries in the region join in this alliance? Some countries will, but countries in Southeast Asia, Indonesia, in ASEAN, we tend to be much more inclusive in our outlook, including in democracies rather than us and them. We like to engage with all countries aspiring to be democracy, like in the Bali Democracy Forum. So, there's no easy answer for it. But I would argue that while there'll be those who are much more ideological, at the end of the day, it's interest actually, it's the most important in conduct foreign policy.
Thank you, Ibu Dewi. Professor Tanaka, 2 minutes, please.
Well, thank you very much. I think, in ultimate terms, it's very difficult for the two countries with completely different value system to get along. But that does not necessarily mean, as the previous speakers indicated, that diplomacy is impossible. For example, with China or with the former Soviet Union that had huge stockpiles of nuclear weapons, you cannot simply destroy them. That will mean your destruction. And so you have to coexist with the countries under a value system totally different from you. And then in my understanding, the Biden administration, although emphasizing democratic values, I think he used the word power of example rather than imposition of American system on others. Well, in a way, liberal democracy under the current world is in defensive. And the US under the Trump administration endured all sorts of authoritarian pressure from the president to resist, to keep American liberal democratic system. Well, maybe because I had not been in the United Kingdom, I feel somewhat more optimistic about the United States than Rizal. I trust the country that can still defeat Mr. Trump. you know, under a authoritarian figure like Mr. Trump, with all sorts of tendency of all terrible authoritarian leaders around the world, the US maintained its law and finally defeated him in a completely democratic election. And I think, but then this still means that democracy is on the defensive. And US has to restore its division, and US has to be careful in expressing their opinions about other countries' opinions. I think the one good tendency among the incoming leadership in the Biden administration, they tend to be more humble than for American Democrats. And so I think the US will create a coalition of liberal democracies and make lots of comments about the necessity of liberal democracies around the world. But I think they try to maintain a balance between their values and necessity of coexistence.
Thank you. And I hope the comments from the four speakers answer questions about democracies. There are three questions at least about this democracy. I'm sorry that I paraphrased the question so that we can, you know, address more generally. Now, there's a question from the floor, if I may. Maybe this is for speakers from ASEAN about what specific items would ASEAN want to have on the agenda if there would be a ASEAN-US special summit that was canceled back in March. So if there is one, what would ASEAN want to be on the agenda, you know, for Biden to accept? Ambassador Ong Keng Yong, maybe you can start again. 2 minutes, please.
Yeah, thank you. I would just say that we should try to see how we can open CPTPP to participation by China. Because at the end of the day, if you look at what has happened in the past 40 years in our region, inclusive of China, Japan, Korea, India, Australia, New Zealand, it is basically trade. Yeah. And the contemporary interpretation of trade has to include many other things. Yeah. Things like intellectual property, environmental protection, sustainability of our various extractive industries, and so on. So all these elements have already been covered through the genius of the negotiator in our TPP, which is now through the great effort of the Japanese leaders, called CPTPP. So if we can find a way to engage China into this framework, it will be good. We need not have to say that we open our door and have everything completely settled, but at least go back to the early principle, Pak Yusof, when we did our ASEAN-China opening of free trade, we have this early harvest idea. So maybe there's one way to get the Chinese participation in a CPTPP. Secondly, I think we should talk about the Mekong region, because China is already actively engaged in the Mekong region. Yeah, water resource management and environmental issues, all these are critical. And if we really want to contribute to in a significant way to China, to the climate change, Mekong region is important. It's just as important as the Amazon in the South American continent. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Yusuf.
I'm more inclined to be like Rizal, to be pessimistic. I've been 40 years visiting the United States 4 times a year, 40 years. And I still, at the end, come to the conclusion that there's not much that we can do with the United States and that they have a real interest in us. I don't think so. And that's why I think that our regional, cooperation is a very important one to face all this type of intrusions or imposition of the big powers. According to me, that is the only way East Asia can survive and can thrive. And we have something to say now. I think we have done very well compared to other parts of the world, on overcoming this COVID. For instance, we have been done very well in 2008, facing the big, actually, financial problems that the world has faced. And we have done very well, despite we have to change government in Indonesia in 98, when the financial crisis of Asia has happened. So I thought East Asia could be one of the most important part of the world in the future, because as long as we can get our act together, I think it's something to be said that we can do a little more. And then in relation to the United States, what they should do is listen to others more and not only listen to themselves.
Thank you, Pak Yusuf. Ibu Dewi, 2 minutes, your response.
Yeah, I'm in between the pessimism and optimism. I'll take the middle path. I agree that there is perceptions about the United States being an unreliable partner. It's not going to go anywhere soon. It's true that on the one hand, the great democracy mechanism enables Trump to be defeated. But on the other hand, what has cost American credibility is that hard negotiated agreements could be just abandoned. And then restoring them under a new administration is not a guarantee that another administration like Trump will not again walk away from that kind of agreement. So these problems of credibility is an issue. And here I agree with Yusuf that Southeast Asia, we have ASEAN now, and East Asia, we are now in a position not to act as a supplicant to the United States, but in a much stronger position to say, this is what we are, what we have achieved, and that the United States need to be much more attentive and to pay more attention to us. So educating the United States is also very important. But I'm not going to write off the United States. It is still a great country. It has great potentials, innovation, and the economy, and all those best research universities, and it's still the greatest military power in the world. It's just about managing it. So I agree that the ASEAN and other should be able, to talk with the United States in a way that will help to inform the United States about the region, about the complexity of the region, and giving greater, allowing greater agency to region, and not simply to be sporadic in its attention, and parachute when there's trouble and then go off again and neglect it completely, because it takes time to build trust, but it's very short. It's very easy to destroy. But finally, I would say that, adding on the economic issues, the US is really lagging behind China because it's not really taking part in this infrastructure development. So, it wants to be able to compete with BRI, but in the past, it did not have that mechanism. But with this BUILD Act, this better utilization of investment leading to development, BUILD Act passed under Trump in 2018, there is an expectation that the US, with its strong private sectors, will also be able to play a role in infrastructure development. So ASEAN probably need to remind the next administration that the US economy engagement in Southeast Asia should also pay greater attention to this, the follow-up the BUILD Act and to the infrastructure need of the region.
Thank you, Ibu Dewi. Now, we still have five more minutes before we end the session. There's this one question, and I think this is important on the economic issue that the Ibu Dewi just touched upon. There's a question from the floor that says China is the key economic partner of ASEAN, and the recent OECD projection that China is going to drive global growth, but at the same time, the US will remain the dominant power. Now, what role do we want US and China to play in such a setting? That China is the driving for the global growth, but at the same time, US remain one of the strongest superpowers. Tanaka-san, 1 minute
Well,
only, please. Yes.
Thank you. I think it is a fact that China's economy is going to lead the world economy in at least in the coming year, because according to any projections, the economies of most advanced industrial democracies will be stagnant until the COVID-19 pandemic is over. And so the best thing that we all do is to maintain good economic relations with China, and persuading China not to utilize its own market for political bullies. And I think that's what we are going to expect. I think I would like to make some comments about the US and China's relations with CPTPP. I think Biden administration is not easily able to persuade the American public to rejoin TPP. And well, partly because the U.S. had concluded bilateral partnership agreement with Japan. So the U.S. appears to have some of the gains that the TPP gives the U.S. already. And so coming back to the TPP may not be on the highest agenda for Mr. Biden. And then on that respect, I think recent Mr. Xi Jinping's interest in joining TPP, to me, is simply a political ploy. To distract public's view when the United States is not able to rejoin TPP. Well, as long as the China continues to maintain the current communist system, it's impossible for the rest of the CPP members to accept it.
Thank you, Tanaka-san. Ambassador Ong Keng-yong.
Thank you. Many decades ago, no one believed the Soviet Union would disappear. So I think the wisdom of history is we should not always rely on one interpretation from our reading and analysis on what the world will be like or what can happen in the world. After all, we are all diplomats, whether you are in a research center or you are in the foreign service. We try our best. This is the way to encourage hope and having a more optimistic outlook for the humanity. You know, going forward, I just feel that the challenge will be for us in ASEAN to work with the other people around us. Today we have our Japanese colleagues, yeah, and others. China's economic situation is something that appear rosy and very positive going forward. But yesterday in a newspaper report, the former negotiator of China, which brought China into WTO, Mr. Long Yong-tu, yeah, Pak Yusof, you remember this old man? He said that, you know, the Chinese state-owned enterprises and the Chinese domestic economy required a lot more motivation to reform itself, because for China to do what it wants to do on a global basis, the domestic economic condition and structure must be far better than what it is today. Yeah. And then on the other side, in recent months, we see American economy. We thought they are the powerful economy in the world. Everything should be great, and the structure and institution and the processes are all in good shape. But when we look at it today, something's not right. So I think maybe there is a middle path. We all learn from one another and try to give mutual support to give our own, to enhance our mutual resilience. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Keng Yong, Ibu Dewi. And then the last will be Pak Yusuf. Ibu Dewi, please, 1 minute as we already exceed the time.
Okay, yeah, on the economy, this is my area, Philip. So I will concede the floor here to one who is much more knowledgeable about that.
All right, thank you, Ibu Dewi. Pak Yusuf.
Well, I think, the COVID actually has shown to the world that if we are not cooperating with everybody, we cannot solve this problem. We are thinking only on the vaccine. That's just only a small problem in the whole context of the aftermath of the COVID. The economic problems has not even been touched yet. We talk about a little bit about debt, problems to be solved, a little bit to the most poorest countries, but that is not the question of restructuring the world economy as it should if we are really taking care of the future, of the world economy. So therefore, according to me, we cannot escape both of these big countries to participate. I think that is true that this American actually economy is not as strong as Keng Yong said. They want to help us with infrastructure. Their infrastructure is the worst in the world. What do they want to say? There is no roads that is good, in the United States. There is no train that is running on time. So what do you want? There's nothing. So therefore, we have, as Keng Yong said, we have to get them all together. There's no way that we can otherwise change the whole, problems that we are going to face in the future on the economy because of all these pandemics.
Thank you, Pak Yusuf. Before we close, I'd like to invite Imura-san, if you have something to say to close this session, because you are one of the initiators of this series of webinar that CSIS, RSIS, and GRIPS conduct. Imura-san, 1 or 2 minutes, please. You are still muted.
Do you hear me?
Yes, please.
Yes. Thank you very much, Philip. So it has been wonderful and very productive discussions we had. One of the most important questions has been a little bit missing, which is the strengths and cohesiveness of ASEAN. You have been showing some division among member countries, and particularly in terms of South China Sea and on other issues. And unless you become cohesive, I'm afraid that ASEAN will be, or Southeast Asia as a whole, will be theater of competition for sphere of influence between United States and China. And now I do understand that you have been discussing among member countries, always on the occasion of summit and on the occasion of economic and foreign ministers, you have been discussing about COVID-19. But now it's also time for you to discuss about how you can be cohesiveness and you can maintain solidarity among member countries regarding Southeast China Sea. I think this is the question which I want to ask Rizal, who looks so nice after having suffered from serious illness. Congratulations. And if you have some time, can you answer me the question, my question regarding ASEAN and South China Sea?
Sure. Bang Rizal, would you like to respond very quickly?
Well, the answer is actually, it's very long, so it's been hard to discuss. Probably we need, another sessions, especially on the future of the South China Sea dispute, and how to deal with it. So I think that is good, it's a good topic as well, especially in the context of the new administration in the US. Sorry, Marsa.
Yeah,
I can talk more about Brexit now instead of Sarjanasi.
oh,
Okay, so
you.
I think we've exceeded the time, and I would not be able to summarize the rich discussion that we have. But one thing for sure is that U.S.-China relation is not one-dimensional; it's a multi-dimensional. So I think we should find ways to engage both U.S. and China for the benefit of East Asia. That's the only thing I can say about the discussion. A summary is yours to make, and the conclusion also are yours to make. I'd like to thank all the panelists, the 4 panelists, for their great insights, and of course the participation from the floor as well. I apologize if I was not able to invite more views from other distinguished participants, but this is not going to be our last webinar. So we hope that we are going to see you again, sometimes very soon. Thank you, and have a good day. Stay healthy.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you very much.